If there are any technological challenges in particular, say with sticking millions of sensors around cities to collect the data that has been promised to us that will enable us to generate these smart cities. So I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, so I think the crucial points that I mentioned in here that relate to your question is, one, all of these devices require power, not just the device to be powered, but they are transmitting data and information, and then that goes somewhere, and that somewhere is kind of similarly considered to what we talked about yesterday. It's an externality. So it never really appears in anyone's equation. There's these data centers that just look like an ordinary building, and you don't really see them as such, and they consume a lot of power. So that is one problem. The other problem is that the designers and manufacturers of those devices, they usually design them with planned obsolescence, which means that it's difficult or even impossible to change batteries. They're actually designed to fail or designed to run out of battery after a couple of years. And then you've got to remove and discard the entire sensor, the entire device. Chuck it goes to China or Accra, as we just saw in Ghana. And it's out of sight, out of our minds. And I think that is another problem of the way that we install those devices to drive efficiency gains, and we talk about sustainability in our cities, but we don't really consider the entire ecosystem of where they come from and where they go.
Yeah. I agree, but I hope there are some ways that we can overcome these challenges. I'm sure you've got some ideas in your head. Does anyone else have any questions?
Probably a big question, but I was just wondering in terms of what you see in the potential for Brisbane and what's kept you here so long?
Brisbane is both great as well as challenging. So Brisbane is super large. It's in fact the largest local government council because it's not kind of compartmentalized in different local government, it's all one. The challenge there is that it moves relatively slow. If we do work with smaller councils, they're usually more agile. They can make a decision, and because it's a smaller hierarchy and a smaller geographic area, they're quicker to implement things. So with Brisbane, it takes a little bit longer, but then again, you reach quite a large geographic area as well as population area. And in comparison to some of the other work that we do with our colleagues internationally in Europe or in the US, it's still relatively easy to get to people in decision-making positions and talk to them about these issues. And they're quite receptive and accessible as well. So that's kind of what I find quite attractive about working here in Brisbane.
I'm wondering if you can give us an example of a city somewhere in the world that's doing it really well.
In terms of the cohabitation piece, that is still relatively new thinking. I mean, it isn't new with regards to these animal bridges that you might have seen outside cities, but in terms of urban design that drives cohabitation, I think that is still a relatively new area. In terms more generally about cities that I find quite progressive, it's probably, again, similar to what we heard yesterday about Scandinavian cities, Northern European cities that are high on OECD kinds of benchmarking lists. So I've been working closely with colleagues in Denmark. In Aarhus, for instance, they have designated entire areas of living laboratories where citizens come together with community groups, with businesses, with the local government to trial new ideas. And it goes far beyond this notion of community consultation, where we just get into this room on a Sunday for an hour. You all submit your little postcards, and then you go off again. So this ongoing and this commitment to continuity with regards to the engagement is something that is quite significant.
Is there any way to transfer that, or for us to harness that and bring that here, those systems?
Yes, so we are in the process of doing so. There is an international community of practice of cities that are interested in that. It's called the OASC, the Open and Agile Smart Cities Network. And we've started to bring this to Australia. So there's now a number of cities that are signed up, and we are looking for more cities to become members. So it's really an organization that drives those kinds of ideas, and it's exclusive to cities. So the tech vendors are not allowed to become members and then go in there and just say, oh, buy my product. The membership is only open to city representatives.
Thank you.
OASC.
Could I just add a tiny thing to that? Sorry, what's her name? I just wanted to say something to that. In the water industry, there's a lot of stuff happening where concrete channels are being deconstructed and natural systems are being put in their place. if you look at what's happened in South Korea, they took down a 6-lane freeway and put a natural creek system right in the middle of Seoul. And that brings the wildlife back. We did the same thing at a local government in Sydney, not the same thing, but we reconstructed a concrete channel. So there's lots of things you can do in cities to sort of bring wildlife back into the city.
Another interesting thing about
just
Seoul.
in the interest of time, we're going to have to move on to the next presentation.
Urban agriculture.
Sorry. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you.
Marcus.
Thank you. Thanks, Marcus, for that. It's sort of a nice segue into our talk. My name is Nilmini, and my background is is engineering and water management, so flooding, stormwater, etc. For most of my career in Australia, I have worked in local government in the natural systems area, managing catchments at Fairfield City Council in Western Sydney. My partner Stephen is a town planner. His background is in infrastructure planning, working in local government consultancies. He's also written this book, which you can find on our website. We've got cards here. And he's doing his PhD on the circular economy and sustainable cities. 4 years ago, we sort of quit the system because we were really anxious to really dive into this issue, and we were feeling a little bit frustrated working in the system, not really getting all the green wins that we wanted. And we started Polisplan, which is our own little consultancy. 2 years ago, we became a mobile consultancy. So we quit our jobs and we left our home and we moved into a motorhome so we could work with communities all over Australia who were really interested in the idea of being resilient and sustainable. And so we are here today to talk to you about a new paradigm for land development and town planning and our vision for a circular economy internet of cities. And so just a very quick thing, Steve's going to talk to you about why we're talking about a city at an economics conference. His PhD is actually in the political economy division at Sydney Uni. I'll talk to you about how we can design this new economic city to integrate principles of on-planet living and create a system that provides for our basic needs. And Steve will wrap up by talking about how many of the other alternative economic models that we talked about yesterday can actually fit in this vision.
Thanks, Neil. So the key thing that I'd like to start with is why we talk about cities when we're talking about at an economics conference. What is it about? How do the two ideas connect? And so we believe in order to move forward into a new economy, we need to understand fully our existing economy and how it was created and what it actually means. And so throughout this talk, I'd like you to keep two ideas in mind. The two ideas that Kate Rayworth finished with yesterday, that cities, the new paradigm needs to be regenerative and it needs to be distributed. They're the two ideas. So the current economic model is take, make, use, dispose model. And so that means where we make and use things in the economy, we value it highly, and places we take them from and dispose it to, we value it less. So it's about differentiating value. And so that's how we create our cities. We draw from the peripheries into the centre. So it's about, it's not just linear, it's about centralising value. So that we do have a distributed network of cities around the planet, but some are valued more highly than others. So it's about drawing value from the periphery and from the environment into the centre. So that's the economic model that we've created. So we have economic growth, but only in the centre. You don't get economic growth in the periphery or in the environment. It's only for the capital cities or for the centre. And we have environmental harm, of course. So how did we develop this model? Where does it actually come from? And so the word city actually means a community of citizens. It's what the Latin word was, what the Romans believed, and before them what the Greeks believed in the way that they constructed their cities. And so how did they do it? Who were the citizens? Well, the citizens were, of course, the free men, who were able to do all of these other things because the women and slaves did all the work. So it's about deliberately dividing the society into two groups so that some have freedom and some do all the work. So a deliberate plan for inequality. It was a design feature of the model of city that they tried to develop. And there were reasons for that we can't really go into now, but essentially this frames all the language and the ideas that we have about what a city is. It's about freedom and work, the division of freedom and work. How do we aspire to or get towards freedom, which is the thing that we desire. And all the language that we have, the polis was the place where the men lived or operated in order to do those activities that we mentioned earlier, sport, art, philosophy, politics, etc. And the household was the private domain versus the public domain, the economy versus the political domain. So we really can't talk about a new economy without talking about a new political system. So it's a political economy that we need to talk about, not just an economy. And so we still have, despite these attempts for everybody to get into the political domain, to get that freedom, we still create, the structure of the system is still creditors and debtors, foreigners and citizens. It's all about division. How do we create this division in society, therefore inequality, in order for some people to be free at the expense of others? So it's about shifting the responsibility or shifting work from one group to another group. And so we have the division in our political thinking, some on the left wanting equality, and on the right, the people who already have freedom want more freedom. So that's essentially the structure of our society, and it comes from this worldview that the Greeks had of the polis as separate from the economy, from the household. So the polis, as they conceived it, wasn't the whole of the city-state. It was the free space in which the citizens were able to participate in things that were determined as civilized. So the word politia in Greek, from polis, meaning civilized, means the ability to do things, to elevate yourself above the basic necessities of life. So the natural obligations. And so what we need to do is to create this holistic city. So the women did the agriculture, so all the food was outside of the city, for example, all the natural needs were satisfied in the household, in that sort of space. And so we've created our cities in this exact same form, that the city excludes the rural areas. So the food systems that feed the people in the city are outside of the city. So what we need to do is shift that model to one in which food is in the city, is a central part of the city. So this is a much more holistic approach. It embraces all of the basic needs that we have. It gives us a direct connection to land and the natural environment. And it starts to think of the city as a system that provides our basic needs. So how do we design a place that we participate in order to receive the things that we need? That's why we work together in one place, why we create a social system. And that then allows us to provide those basic needs, equal access to food and water and the basic needs for everybody. And this is kind of the schematic model of what we're trying to do, and Nil will talk a little bit more about how we integrate food and water and energy systems into our built environment.
Yeah. So at the heart of our vision is about bringing food into the city, and that's something that town planners really talk about. So if we want to talk about bringing food into the city, we have to talk about irrigating it. So we have to automatically talk about water, and then we have to think about how we're going to get water from A to B, so we need energy as well. So the idea, and why we're talking about the circular economy, is because we really want to transition to zero waste, and we want to look at how the inputs of one system can be, the outputs of one system can be the inputs to another. So the whole dialogue in Europe about the circular economy is mostly about products. We are talking about integrating water, food, and energy into passively designed housing so that we can create a holistic system. Marcus mentioned that we have a crisis of consumption. And so one of the other things that we are talking about, because 40% of the heating that occurs in Australia is for space heating. And this is the same whether it's Tassie or it's Brisbane, because it's heating in one place, air conditioning in the other. And so by designing not just passively designed housing, but also looking at a combination of private and public spaces, by minimizing our private space and maximizing our shared spaces, we can actually address this issue. So there's heaps more I could say here, but as we know very well, if we look at the industry of energy or what's happening with water, in each of these spaces, there's a lot of technological advances, there's a lot of stuff happening. We want to bring it all together and integrate it so it's in resonance with our natural system. And this is how we can actually achieve one planet living. So the other thing we're talking about is population. Let's look at a place, a catchment. Let's look at what we can harness from the natural environment. And let's look at what constrains it so we can really plan for a population. And once we reach that population, we are thinking with a maximum of about 150 to 200 people. The number 150 comes from the Dunbar number. That's also the number where we can have interactions with each other. That's the number of people that we can really have proper relationships with before it gets too much for us. And so we talked about population yesterday. I think the issue with population is because everybody's trying to cram into our cities. We want to design smaller places that are designed in harmony with the environment, and once that number, that constraint is reached, we then create another city. And so this, and the other issue that we are talking about is create places that provide for our basic needs. Now, there's a lot of rhetoric that's happening around the idea of a basic income, but does this really address inequality? A universal basic income giving the same amount of people the money to everybody who has very different needs, whose starting point is very different, does not create equality. But what if we created places where you could get a place to live and water, food, and energy for free? Because the next thing that is obviously on our doorstep is this issue that technological advances in robots will reduce the amount of work that is available for us. So what if you create places where instead of working 40 hours a week, you get 15 hours of your day to keeping the assistance going? So we design a place with the right infrastructure, but then we sort of tending to zero in terms of we don't have to keep paying for our energy once we pay for the infrastructure if we have the right combination of energy in terms of solar, wind, wave, whatever it is that is suitable for that catchment. And the people who are living there are helping to maintain those systems. So the other thing that we sort of talked about yesterday was supply chains. What if we had 3D printers in these places where all of the stuff that we are coming up with in terms of waste, like take your plastic milk bottles, for example, can be scrunched down into pellets that can then make something else, like a piece of furniture that you can use in the place that you're living in. I mean, this is not a utopian idea. This is already happening. There's a lot. If you look at a website called Precious Plastics, you can see that there's lots of ideas in terms of how your plastic can be recycled in the place that you live. And some of those things can actually be made from scratch. So we don't actually have to be shipping stuff over to Malaysia. We can actually deal with the waste in the places that we live. We just have to make it easy for people, because people don't really know what to do, so they just keep buying heaps of stuff. But if we construct a place, if we design a place that actually deals with this issue, and a good example to have a look at are the Satayama villages in Japan. David Attenborough has done a fantastic YouTube of these villages. They have existed for like 1,000 years, extremely sustainably. And now those villages, the thinking behind that is being made into policy in Japan.
What was the name of the city? Sorry.
Satoyama, Satoyama. They're villages, they're ancient villages that sort of exist based on these principles of sustainable, regenerative living. And so we've spent the last 2 years developing these visions, doing little projects with people around Australia, like in Tasmania, with an Inca village there, with the community of Signet over there. But what we really want to do is to build a demonstration project. And to this end, we have written a vision document. We've got a website which will sort of give you the link at the end. But our 2-year journey has brought us to Tweed Council, to Northern New South Wales. And we've been talking with the planners there, and they have given us an opportunity to present to Tweed Council in 2 weeks' time. But not only that, we've taken our ideas to CSIRO. We've been speaking with Simon Tosdale, who's in the Resilient Cities of the 21st Century Division, where they are doing amazing modeling in terms of water, energy, food, etc. And so they can look at a catchment and say, okay, the best mix of energy for this catchment is this. And so CSIRO have said they will collaborate with us. Simon's actually going to come to help us in our presentation to Council. We've also approached the University of Queensland and the Global Change Institute, and we've talked to a number of different researchers there, and especially Bill Valotti, who runs the food, not especially, but including Bill Valotti, who runs the food section. And a number of researchers from UQ have also said yes, they will collaborate with us, not just to research and develop this vision. And so if the Council of Tweed says yes, then we can start looking for land and kind of make this a reality. We just believe that when the right time comes, we'll find the funders or some philanthropist who believes in us as much as we do. So the idea is to find a piece of rural land and to embed land from our life, have a big agricultural zone, and then have a business park, so it will involve some rezoning of rural land. And this is something that, and this is why we are approaching the council up front, because we want this to be a journey that we go on with the council that believes in this. And the reason we chose Tweed is because they have an amazing DCP, a development control plan, that talks about regenerative development. So this is another thing that you heard about yesterday from Kate, and we believe that this is the future. You know, it is about enhancing the land so it's good for the creatures as well as for us. And this is how we're going to live sustainably. But in addition, it's going to have an industrial circular economy embedded within the system. So we are talking about an incubation hub where we'll have all kinds of jobs, like that might be a work hub. So we might be able to invite some big IT company from Sydney to relocate some of these workers. But it'll also have your bakeries and all the other bits and pieces that we need. And so once we've developed one and got the right policies in place, we can start to replicate it with tweakings, obviously, for the catchment conditions. And that's why we're talking about a distributed model and an internet of cities.
So it's really about, as I said earlier, we already have an internet of cities, as in a network of cities around the planet. But what we do is we maximise trade. And what we're saying is maximise the local, minimise trade, or minimise the energy needed for trade. So that's essentially the model that we've started to develop now, starting to think of the internet as the connections rather than in terms of, you know, road transport and rail transport and aeroplanes and so on. How can we transport as much over the internet, transport information over the internet, so we can collaborate online, as we saw Kate Rayworth's presentation yesterday, for example. And this is very consistent with the traditional Indigenous way of looking at the world as a network of waterholes. So rather than thinking of cities as a congested capital where everyone has to live, work, whatever, we can travel through the landscape between waterholes. And the waterhole, of course, was not just for water, it was where the fruit trees and the animals went, so that was where food was, and that was where they put their shelter and their fire. So,
and I might just add that we're also doing a project in the Atherton Tablelands with an Indigenous community that is looking to go back on country. And so what they want to do is actually, to make use of new technology, but combine it with their ancient knowledge. So
and that was their driver. They said,
yeah.
we don't want you to tell us how to do community. They do community really well. What they needed was the technology. And all of the eco-villages, the intentional communities that we visited, struggle with community. So, it's a really neat fit for us to kind of learn from them and for them to learn from us. I just want to talk briefly about how this model embraces a whole lot of the other economic models that you might be hearing around this presentation. So the idea of the circular economy as it's presented in Europe and in most of the research that you'll hear about circular economy is about closed production cycles. But the idea of aligning with the natural cycles is the idea of regenerative development, or regenerative economy. So some people talk about that as a future economic model. Steady state economy is about time. Like you have a growth phase, but you also have a degrowth phase. And so planning for life cycles is another way, is what the steady state economy is about. But thinking in cycles again is why we're emphasising the idea of a circular economy. And also the sufficiency economy is about minimising what we need. And we're also talking about minimising demand, but not just minimising it per se, but doing it as efficiently as possible so that we have as much free time as possible. So rather than shifting responsibility from one group to another, how do we make the system, the basic needs provided as efficiently as possible so we can have as much freedom as possible. So I'll just flick through those slides. This is why we're talking about developing a new narrative. A holistic system is about compassion. We're all in this together. Distributed in terms of equality and efficiency to minimise work freedom. So they're the ideals of the French Revolution. Except we don't use fraternity because it undermines equality. So let's talk about compassion. So that's it. Just some key points. Importance of narratives, agriculture in the city, think holistically, focus on distributive efficiency, and commit to cities, match the population to the capacity of the infrastructure in that place. And
so that's how we decided that we are developing to encompass these ideas in terms of how the practical visioning can be made into a reality. So the word utility has come because we see this place that we are dreaming of as a mix of a combination of beauty and utility. A blending of beauty and utility.
Well, thank you so much, guys. Sorry to rush you through all that really important stuff at the end there, but I'm just conscious we do have morning tea in 10 minutes, and we'd like to do about 5 minutes of Q&A, and then it's going to take everyone about 5 minutes to get back downstairs for morning tea. So does anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
Really love the vision of all the infrastructure, etc. Totally with you as an architect and a builder. The soft technology, the people side of things, that's what sort of, and I'm really excited to hear that you're looking at partnering with an Indigenous crew up north to learn about what is community. So what other insights have you got in that side of the equation?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that because one of the things we spent about 6 months travelling through Europe, visiting different eco-villages and potential communities and so on. And we did the same around Australia as well.
And Asia.
And one of the things that we came across over and over again is it started with a core group of people who had this vision, and so they gathered other people around them. And then over 90% of eco-village startups don't work. And this is because they're struggling with the idea of developing the land. And so they're developing community at the same time as they're developing land. And if you remember, yesterday Mary Graham's talk was about relational economics, was about separating off those two things. Separating off the management of the land, which is about listening to the land, understanding the land, And that requires some technical expertise in water and food systems and energy management and designing of buildings, architectural design and so on. So it's the same as when you want to buy a house. You can either buy the land and build the house, or you can buy a finished house. So we're offering that other alternative. How can you buy a finished product, buy into a finished product as a community or group of people, rather than forming the community and then trying to work out what it is that you have to build here and where are you going to build it. So it's making that shift and separating the relationship between land and people as opposed to relationships between people.
And Winston Churchill said, we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. So we are trying to shape our city, believing that if we create the right spaces
and
community will organically form because people will go to
people
the
are working
places.
together to provide their
Yeah.
basic needs.
You'd have a strong ally with the chief Victorian architect who's interested in the fourth sector, what you're describing.
Okay.
The community-based developers developing place for community as opposed to for-profit.
Can we get some details after? Yeah. Yeah, cool.
Some more questions?
Yeah.
Over there? Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to blend it with the question I had earlier. So another factor that runs home as to why Seoul was successful with its things is it population density, stuff like that. But they've also got they got a booming urban agriculture scene. So Seoul, Korea. So one of the other ideas to get that sort of happening is getting the foundation idea to people in these areas. If we want something like that over here, it's more of the case of the people in the know, people in the room, seeing when we do have a startup, let's start going there. And so I'm sort of with the group that's starting that up, an urban ag forum in Brisbane. So I just wanted to make that statement as it connected in nicely then, but there it is. Yep.
Okay. Have we got any other questions? Any questions? Problem?
Thank you so much. That's so stimulating. And I guess my question is about the other side. If you have this sort of community technology, where do you feel like you can hook onto the, I don't know how to express this, and I've got this awful ear infection, so bear with me in my sentences. The set of professional knowledge that could allow you to construct the technology and the way that the energy, water, and buildings all come together with enough capacity for it to be shared, so that it's not built on the current kind of public-private models of intellectual property and legal ownership that currently make it very difficult to use those systems.
Yeah, so one of the things that we are looking at, which I didn't mention, was also ownership structures. So we want to actually change the paradigm in terms of private ownership.
Yeah.
And we are thinking of looking at a system where perhaps a company might own the land and you might be buying shares into the company. Sun Villages in Canberra it's a development that's happening where this other way of access is being looked at.
What was the name of it?
Sun Villages, Sun S-U-N Villages in Canberra.
And this is a company owned by the citizens or the residents, not a company that's
Yeah, and so we're also looking at having just one meter for the village, so we're not going to be metering everybody separately. And blockchain technology and all of this is going to make simpler as well. There was another question.
I think we'll do one last question at the back.
Yeah, great work on extending on the circular economy, by the way, that's awesome. Mike, you're touching on Indigenous, and they are the masters of survival. And I think one thing that they do that our modern arrogance doesn't do is consider rest into the process. And a city never rests. And so therefore it can't regenerate because we're here giving it pressure all the time. I'd love to know how that kind of, it's refurbishing itself is factored in.
It's about freedom. The freedom element was, the idea around all this is one of the fundamental human drivers is the pursuit of freedom. And this underpins the idea of spirituality, which is about getting out of our natural condition, and all of these ways of freedom from our natural necessities is kind of the fundamental driver of many human activities or human nature. So what we talk about is, John Maynard Keynes mentioned or wrote a paper in 1930 saying that by 2030, technology should have advanced so much that we'd be working no more than 15 hours a week. So that would be the case if we're distributing fairly, right? If we're filling that time with bullshit jobs because that's what we have to do in order to get our basic needs satisfied, then we need to. It just can't work. The system's collapsing. That's what is happening. We're just creating jobs for the sake of people being able to feed themselves. So how do we create a system that provides those basic needs efficiently, and then we have the freedom to do other things? And the direction that we go in that space, like the $64 million question is, what will we do with that freedom? Yeah. Will it be, pursuit of art and other things, or I don't know. But we have to create the freedom in order to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting is that the environment provides all the value for the economy. The economy absolutely contributes zero back into the refurbishment of the environment. So I think this is a paradigm shift that needs to take place, and it's not a government that implements it, it's every single individual acting in that space.
That's right.
So,
it's about, it's not, this is about creating an alternative system, makes the existing system obsolete. It's about creating it in rural areas where we can draw people out of the cities into a network of places. So that's probably what we're trying to do.
Okay, we might wrap up the session there. We have another round of applause, please.